With all the uproar over horse welfare in the competition dressage world recently, or rather the apparent lack of it, it would be easy for anyone who really cares about their horses to think that maybe the whole idea of dressage is something we should all just abandon. But, in my opinion, that would be a mistake. And I'd like to take a few moments to explain why. Now, to begin with, let's get clear about what dressage actually is, and more importantly, what it isn't. In the modern day, dressage is usually explained as being the French word for training, and there's a belief that goes along with that definition that doing dressage means teaching your horse to do particular movements in response to particular aids or cues. But that's actually a big misunderstanding, and it gets a great many horses and riders into trouble. You see, a lot of riders, and you might be one of them, have been led to believe that the secret to dressage is about giving the right aids to get the movement that you want. And if you read the dressage manuals, the answer to the question, well, what should I do if my horse doesn't respond when I give my aids, is repeat them more strongly and then insist. Now, when riders are using what the manuals or their teacher says are the right aids, but their horse still isn't doing what they want, or maybe even starts objecting to being asked at all, well, that can very quickly turn into thinking that it must be because their horse is being lazy or difficult or even naughty. So it shouldn't really be a surprise when riders use force in their riding when things aren't going the way they want, or resort to even more unpleasant tactics out of desperation. But that's only one way of looking at things. If you watch horses playing together, you'll see they can already do all the movements that you'll find in any dressage test long before we ever sit on them. So the problem isn't that we have to teach them what to do. Getting our horses to reliably do what we want them to do when we want them to do it is more about us learning how to communicate clearly in a horse-friendly language they can actually understand. And even more importantly, it's about making it easier and more comfortable for our horses to go ahead and do the things that we ask them to do, even while carrying us on their backs. You see, pretty much all horses feel more confident when they carry more of their body weight on one particular front leg. It's just like humans being naturally left or right-handed. And when we ask them to carry us too, well, this unevenness gets even more amplified. When they lean more on one particular shoulder like this, they also swing their necks and their hindquarters over to the opposite side in order to maintain the balance and avoid falling over. So if you looked at them from above, well, they'd stand and move with their bodies bent more to one side or to the other. And this one-sidedness, or asymmetry as it's called, starts to develop very early on in a horse's life, and it has major knock-on effects throughout their bodies. For example, it means they'll be happier to bend in one direction than the other, and they'll find certain things, like starting canter on a particular lead, or even just completing a circle that's actually round, much more difficult when they're travelling on one rein and easier when they're on the other. As a rider, an asymmetrical horse will give you the feeling that they brace more on one rein, that the saddle sits off to one side, or that trotting on one particular diagonal feels a lot easier than the other. Now, as it happens, there's a much older understanding of the word dressage, and that actually has a lot more to do with straightening things out, a bit like dressing a table for dinner. And if you look back into the old books on the subject, dressing horses was a phrase that described a process of helping them become more symmetrical, better balanced, and more equally flexible on both sides. So in other words, it was about setting them straight. Now, when you look at it this way, dressage isn't actually about teaching your horse how to do particular movements. It's more a process of patiently and progressively helping them overcome their asymmetries and let go of all the compensatory tensions that the asymmetries cause through a logical and cleverly constructed process of gymnastic training. Real dressage, the kind of dressage that empowers your horse, it's firstly about learning how to have a conversation using a language that's easy for horses to understand, so you can quietly and gently ask them to do any of the movements that they already know how to do. And then an empowering rider uses their knowledge and skill to help their horse use his or her body to perform those movements in the most efficient and effective way. So you can help them develop their strength and regain their natural flexibility and suppleness. And when that's done well, it means your horse will not only find it a lot easier to be ridden, but carrying a rider will also cause a lot less wear and tear. And your experience in the saddle will be that he becomes lighter and easier to influence, more responsive to your aids, as well as much happier and more willing to do whatever you ask. Now, riding a dressage test is something really quite different. Tests were created as a way to compare how far different riders had managed to get in this process of developing their horses, and they're a relatively modern invention that's only existed for just over 100 years. Each test itself is a specific pattern of movements, and what really allows a judge to compare the relative performance of each horse and rider is when the horses are asked to change from performing one movement to another, like making changes of bend and direction, or transitions between gaits, or lengthening and shortening the strides, for example. Now, each of these changes or transitions means your horse has to change their posture, balance, and or their degree of forward activity. Lower level tests are made up of relatively simple changes, and the highest level tests require horses to make the biggest changes of balance and activity all the way from one extreme to another, and all linked very closely together. Now, since human nature is what it is, whenever we start putting scores on things, well, of course we'll want to get high marks. And the way dressage tests are scored is by starting out with the idea of perfection and then deducting marks for everything the judge sees that's less than perfect. And although that idea makes sense in theory, well, it often causes some major problems in practice. The thing is, judges don't ever ride the horses that they see in a competition, so they can only assess what they see in front of them. And in the last few decades especially, that's led to an ever-increasing focus on the overall outward appearance of things instead of what really matters, which is the relationship between the two of you and how your horse actually feels and responds when you ask him to change what he's doing. And to get the best scores, it's only right that everything should be perfect. But where things go wrong in the world of competition dressage is when riders get too focused on insisting their horses execute the required movements, and they forget that they're actually riding a living, breathing, thinking creature who's simply doing his best to survive and have a happy life in the circumstances we've put them in. But it doesn't have to be this way. Joe and I know there are riders all over the world who want to do the best for their horses, and using the principles of good dressage to develop their mind, body and spirit is an important part of that. We're passionate about keeping the old understanding of dressage alive and not allowing the competition-oriented modern-day meaning of the word to take over and stop horses and riders from experiencing all the benefits they can enjoy from it when it's done well. After all, a horse that's been genuinely well schooled using horse-friendly principles isn't just easier to ride, they're happier to be ridden and more fun to be with. They also score well in the eyes of any competition judge with the courage and integrity to reward good dressage when they see it. I'm Derek Clark, and I'd love to hear what you think about all this. So scroll down and leave me a comment, and let's have fun with our horses this week.